Sarah Chen had always believed that her biggest worry would be whether the coffee machine at the accounting firm would break down again. At 28, she lived in a modest apartment in downtown Portland, drove a reliable Honda Civic, and spent her evenings watching Netflix while eating takeout Chinese food. Her life was predictably ordinary, and she liked it that way. The morning everything changed started like any other. Sarah's alarm buzzed at 6:30. She stumbled to the shower, grabbed her usual breakfast bar, and headed to Morrison & Associates, where she'd been crunching numbers for the past 4 years. The office building was a typical glass and steel structure, filled with the usual cast of characters. Jim from HR, who always smelled like vanilla cologne, Rebecca, the receptionist who knew everyone's business, and Mr. Morrison himself, who treated the coffee machine like a sacred artifact. Sarah settled into her cubicle, surrounded by motivational posters that someone in management thought would boost productivity. She was halfway through reconciling a particularly stubborn set of quarterly reports when the building's emergency broadcast system crackled to life. This wasn't unusual. They had monthly tests that everyone ignored while continuing to work. But Rebecca's voice wasn't coming through the speakers. Instead, a calm, authoritative voice filled the office. "This is emergency alert system. All citizens are advised to remain indoors and await further instructions." "This is not a test." "Repeat, this is not a test." Sarah looked around the office. Her co-workers had stopped typing and were staring at their computers, phones, or each other with confused expressions. Jim was standing by the water cooler, his vanilla scent forgotten as he pressed his phone to his ear. Mr. Morrison emerged from his corner office, his usually pristine tie slightly askew. "Did anyone else hear that?" Rebecca called out from the reception desk, her voice carrying a tremor that made Sarah's stomach clench. Before anyone could respond, the building's lights flickered once, twice. Then the power died completely, plunging the office into an eerie twilight filtered only by the gray Seattle sky outside. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in a sickly green glow. Sarah's phone had no signal. Neither did anyone else's, based on the frustrated sounds echoing around the office. The landlines were dead too. In the span of 5 minutes, their connected world had become isolated and silent. "Everyone stay calm," Mr. Morrison announced, though his voice betrayed his own uncertainty. "I'm sure it's just a power grid issue. The city will have it sorted out soon." But Sarah was looking out the window, and what she saw made her blood run cold. Other buildings in the downtown area were dark too. Not just a few, all of them. The traffic lights were out, and cars were beginning to pile up at intersections as confused drivers tried to navigate without signals. In the distance, she could see smoke rising from what looked like the airport. Then she saw them. At first, Sarah thought they were helicopters, black shapes moving across the sky in perfect formation, too far away to make out details. But as they grew closer, she realized these weren't any aircraft she'd ever seen. They were sleek, almost organic looking, and they moved with a fluid grace that defied conventional aerodynamics. "Guys," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you need to see this." Her coworkers crowded around the windows. The formation of strange aircraft was directly overhead now, and more were appearing on the horizon. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Jim dropped his phone. "What the hell are those?" The question hung in the air, unanswered and terrifying. Sarah watched as one of the craft descended toward the city center. It was massive, easily the size of a city block, and completely silent. As it lowered, she could see intricate patterns etched into its surface, designs that seemed to shift and flow like living metal. "We need to get out of here," Rebecca said, her voice rising with panic. "We need to go home, find our families." Mr. Morrison was nodding, his usual authority crumbling in the face of the impossible. Yes. Everyone should go home. Be with your loved ones. We'll figure this out." Sarah grabbed her purse and jacket, her hands shaking as she tried to process what was happening. This morning she'd been worried about a coffee machine. Now she was watching what could only be described as an alien invasion unfold outside her office window. The elevator wasn't working, so they all crowded into the stairwell. 23 floors had never seemed so far. With each floor they descended, Sarah could hear more sounds from outside, car horns shouting, the distant wail of sirens that seemed to cut off abruptly. When they finally reached the ground floor, the lobby was chaos. People from other floors were streaming toward the exits, their faces reflecting the same confusion and fear that Sarah felt. Security guards were trying to maintain order, but they looked just as lost as everyone else. Sarah pushed through the revolving door and stepped onto the sidewalk. The air felt different, charged with an energy that made her skin tingle. The alien craft was directly overhead now, so low that she could see individual sections and what might have been windows or sensors dotting its underside. Around her, people were standing in the street pointing up at the sky, taking pictures with their phones even though nothing was transmitting. Some were crying. Others were praying. A few were already running, though Sarah couldn't imagine where they thought they could go. The massive ship began to rotate slowly, and sections of its hull started to glow with a soft blue light. Sarah had seen enough science fiction movies to know that glowing alien technology was rarely a good sign. She started walking quickly toward the parking garage where she'd left her Honda, her sensible flats clicking against the concrete. Behind her, she could hear Mr. Morrison calling out, "Sarah! Sarah, wait!" But she didn't wait. Something deep in her gut was screaming that she needed to get home. Needed to be somewhere familiar when whatever was about to happen actually happened. The ordinary life she'd taken for granted just hours ago suddenly seemed precious beyond measure. As she reached her car, the first communication from the alien vessel began to broadcast, somehow reaching every electronic device in the city simultaneously. Even though most of them had no power, the voice was unmistakably not human, speaking in perfect English with an accent that seemed to come from no earthly place. "People of Earth," it said, and Sarah's hands froze on her car keys. "Your time of isolation is over." Sarah's Honda Civic sputtered to life, one of the few vehicles in the parking garage that still functioned. Around her, other people were frantically trying to start their cars, cursing at engines that had worked perfectly that morning but now refused to turn over. The alien broadcast continued to echo from every direction, as if the very air itself had become a speaker. "We are the hegemony," the voice continued, its tone carrying an undertone of absolute authority. "For millennia we have watched your species struggle in the darkness of ignorance. Today, we offer you the gift of civilization." Sarah backed out of her parking space, navigating around abandoned vehicles and confused pedestrians. The streets were becoming increasingly chaotic as people fled in every direction. Some were on foot carrying hastily packed bags. Others had managed to get older vehicles running, mostly cars from the 1990s or earlier, she noticed. Anything with extensive computer systems seemed to be dead. Her apartment was only 15 minutes away under normal circumstances, but these weren't normal circumstances. Traffic was impossible, with non-functioning stoplights and abandoned vehicles blocking major intersections. Sarah found herself taking side streets and alleys she'd never used before, guided by a growing certainty that she needed to reach the safety of her own space. The alien voice continued its proclamation. "Your primitive governments have fallen. Your weapon systems have been neutralized. Your communication networks now serve our purposes. Do not resist. Compliance will ensure your survival and elevation to a higher form of existence." As Sarah navigated through a residential neighborhood, she saw families loading into pickup trucks and SUVs, their faces grim with determination. An elderly man was pushing a shopping cart filled with what looked like camping gear, while his wife clutched a small radio to her ear. Children peered out from behind curtains, their young faces trying to comprehend what the adults were so afraid of. She pulled into her apartment building's parking lot, just as another massive alien vessel appeared over the eastern part of the city. This one was different from the first, more angular with surfaces that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. As she watched, smaller craft began to detach from its underside like seeds falling from a dark flower. Sarah's apartment was on the third floor of a modest complex that housed mostly young professionals and elderly retirees. She climbed the stairs 2 at a time, her keys jingling in her trembling hands. Mrs. Patterson from 3B was standing in her doorway, still wearing her pink bathrobe and clutching her small white terrier. "Sarah, dear," Mrs. Patterson called out, her voice shaky. "Do you know what's happening?" "My television won't work and my phone is dead." Sarah paused at her door, looking into the older woman's frightened eyes. "I don't think anyone knows yet, Mrs. Patterson, but maybe we should all stay inside for now." Mrs. Patterson nodded, retreating into her apartment with her dog. Sarah heard multiple deadbolts clicking into place as she unlocked her own door. Her apartment felt like a sanctuary after the chaos outside. The familiar sight of her mismatched furniture, Her collection of paperback novels and the framed photo of her parents on the kitchen counter provided a momentary sense of normalcy. But even here she couldn't escape the alien broadcast which seemed to emanate from her walls themselves. Resistance is futile and will result in immediate termination. Cooperation will be rewarded with integration into our civilization. You will be evaluated for your potential contributions to the hegemony. Sarah moved to her living room window, which offered a view of downtown Portland. The alien vessels hung over the city like storm clouds, their surfaces pulsing with that unsettling blue light. From her vantage point, she could see the smaller craft that had detached from the second ship moving with purpose through the streets below. Her landline phone was as dead as everything else, but she tried it anyway, desperate to reach her parents in Arizona or her sister in California. The silence on the other end felt like a physical weight. For the first time in her adult life, Sarah was completely cut off from everyone she cared about. She rummaged through her kitchen drawers until she found an old battery-powered radio that she'd bought for camping trips she'd never actually taken. The batteries were weak, but she managed to pick up a faint signal from what sounded like an emergency broadcast station. A human voice, stressed and barely controlled. "This is Coin Emergency Broadcast. If anyone can hear this, the invasion is worldwide. Reports are coming in from every major city. Military bases have been neutralized. Government officials are being taken into custody by alien forces. Citizens are advised to remain in their homes and await further instructions." The broadcast cut to static, then silence. Sarah tried adjusting the dial but found nothing except the occasional burst of interference. She was alone with her thoughts and the continuing alien proclamation that seemed to seep through her walls. Outside her window, one of the smaller alien craft was moving slowly down her street. It was roughly the size of a school bus, with a crystalline surface that refracted the afternoon light into prismatic patterns. As Sarah watched, it stopped in front of the apartment building across from hers. A section of the craft's hull simply dissolved, revealing an opening that glowed with soft white light. 3 figures emerged, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. They were humanoid, but wrong in subtle ways that made her skin crawl. Too tall, with limbs that seemed slightly too long for their bodies. Their faces were obscured by helmets that looked more grown than manufactured, with surfaces that shifted and flowed like liquid metal. The beings moved with deliberate precision toward the apartment building. They didn't walk so much as glide, their feet barely seeming to touch the ground. Within minutes, Sarah could hear sounds from the building across the street, doors opening, voices raised in surprise and fear, then an unnatural silence. When the beings emerged again, they weren't alone. They escorted a group of humans back to their craft, men, women, and children walking with unnaturally calm expressions. There was no struggling, no resistance. The humans simply followed their captors with vacant, peaceful looks on their faces. Sarah pressed herself against the wall beside her window, her heart pounding so hard she was sure it could be heard through the building. The alien craft rose silently into the air and moved on to the next building. Then the next. They were going door to door, systematically collecting people from every building on the street. Sarah realized with growing horror that her building would be next. She looked around her apartment with new eyes, seeing it no longer as a sanctuary, but as a trap. The familiar objects that had provided comfort moments before now seemed like the possessions of someone who no longer existed. The woman who had worried about coffee machines and quarterly reports was gone, replaced by someone who had to figure out how to survive an alien invasion. The radio crackled back to life for a moment. Underground resistance forming in the tunnels beneath Pioneer Square. If you can reach, bzzt. Bring food and bzzt. Don't trust anyone who seems too calm. Then static again, and silence. Through her window, Sarah could see the alien craft approaching her building. In minutes, those beings would be at her door. She had to make a choice. Wait for them to come for her, or try to escape. Sarah grabbed her hiking backpack from the closet and began shoving supplies into it. Canned food, water bottles, the battery radio, a flashlight, warm clothes. Her hands moved automatically while her mind raced. Underground tunnels. Pioneer Square was downtown, maybe 2 miles away. If she could get there without being seen. The sound of the front door to her building opening echoed up the stairwell. They were inside. Sarah slung the backpack over her shoulders and moved to her bedroom window, which faced the back alley. It was a 3-story drop to the dumpster below. Not ideal, but better than waiting to see what happened to people who were evaluated for their potential contributions. She could hear footsteps in the hallway now, accompanied by a soft humming sound that seemed to vibrate through her bones. They were moving methodically from door to door. Sarah opened her window and looked down at the alley. The dumpster looked very small from 3 floors up. Behind her, someone knocked on her door with inhuman precision. 3 evenly spaced taps that somehow conveyed absolute authority. She climbed onto the windowsill, said a quick prayer to any deity that might be listening, and jumped. Sarah hit the dumpster with a metallic crash that seemed to echo through the entire alley. Pain shot through her left shoulder and ribs, but nothing felt broken. She lay still for a moment, listening for any indication that the aliens had heard her escape. Above, she could see the soft glow from her apartment window, where the beings were presumably searching for her. Garbage bags cushioned her fall but didn't prevent the stench that now clung to her clothes. Sarah carefully climbed out of the dumpster, trying to ignore the pain in her shoulder and the fact that she now smelled like rotting food and old coffee grounds. She pressed herself against the alley wall. Hidden in the shadow of the building, through her apartment window, she could see movement, tall figures with that unnatural grace methodically searching her home. One of them paused at the open bedroom window, its helmeted head turning to scan the alley below. Sarah held her breath, trying to become one with the brick wall behind her. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the figures moved away from the window. Sarah waited until she was certain they had moved on before creeping toward the mouth of the alley. Her Honda was still in the parking lot, but she didn't dare try to reach it. The aliens would undoubtedly be watching all the vehicles. The city had transformed in the few hours since the invasion began. Streets that should have been busy with afternoon traffic were eerily quiet, broken only by the occasional distant sound of running feet or muffled voices. Most of the cars sat abandoned where their electronic systems had failed, creating an obstacle course of metal and glass. Sarah kept to the shadows, moving from building to building toward downtown. Her accounting job had required her to walk these streets daily, but they felt alien now, as foreign as the ships hovering overhead. Every intersection required careful observation to ensure no alien patrols were nearby. She encountered other survivors along the way. A businessman still wearing his tie sat on a bus stop bench, staring blankly ahead with the same vacant expression she'd seen on the people being led to the alien ships. When Sarah approached him, he looked up with glassy eyes. "They're here to help us," he said in a monotone voice. "We should report to the collection centers. Resistance is futile." Sarah backed away quickly. Whatever the aliens were doing to people, it was spreading. The man looked human, but something essential had been stripped away from him. She made a mental note to avoid anyone who seemed too calm or spoke about cooperation. The old Max light rail tunnels offered a route toward downtown that stayed mostly underground. Sarah found an entrance near Lloyd Center, prying open an emergency gate that should have been alarmed but now sat silent like everything else electronic. The tunnels were dark and filled with echoes, but they felt safer than the exposed streets above. She wasn't alone down there. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, Sarah began to see other shapes moving through the tunnels. Some were clearly human refugees like herself, carrying backpacks and moving with the careful urgency of the hunted. Others were harder to identify, figures that moved too smoothly or made sounds that didn't quite match human footsteps. A hand grabbed her shoulder from behind, and Sarah spun around, nearly crying out. A woman about her own age materialized from the shadows, her finger pressed to her lips in a gesture for silence. She was wearing scrubs that identified her as a nurse, though they were now torn and stained with dirt. "You running too?" the woman whispered. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. "I'm Maria, from OHSU." The hospital was one of the first places they hit. Maria's eyes held a haunted quality that made Sarah's stomach clench. They took the patients first, the ones who couldn't run, then the staff who tried to help them. "I'm Sarah. I was at work when it started. They came to my apartment building." Maria gestured for Sarah to follow her deeper into the tunnel. "There's a group of us heading for the old Shanghai tunnels under Pioneer Square. Someone's got a shortwave radio working down there. We're trying to coordinate with other survivors." They moved through the tunnels in silence, occasionally pausing when they heard sounds that might indicate alien patrols. The Max system had been built on top of much older tunnel networks, some dating back to Portland's early days as a rough frontier town. These forgotten passages now provided a hidden highway for human resistance. "How many people have you seen taken?" Sarah whispered as they navigated around a collapsed section of ceiling. "Hundreds," Maybe thousands. Maria's voice was grim. But it's not just the taking. It's what they're doing to people afterward, the ones who come back. They're not the same. They speak in that same flat voice, telling everyone to cooperate, to submit for evaluation. They emerged from the Max tunnels into the older Shanghai tunnel system beneath Pioneer Square. The atmosphere here was different, warmer, more humid, with the smell of old brick and long-standing water. Sarah could hear voices ahead, the first truly human conversation she'd encountered since the invasion began. The survivor camp was centered around a large chamber that had once been part of the old merchant tunnels. Battery-powered lanterns provided scattered pools of light, revealing perhaps 50 people of all ages huddled in small groups. Some were treating minor injuries with improvised medical supplies. Others were working on electronic equipment, trying to establish communication with other survivor groups. An older man with graying hair and the bearing of someone used to command approached them. He wore the remains of what had once been a military uniform, though the insignia had been torn away. "New arrivals?" he asked, his voice carrying authority even in whisper. "I'm Colonel Harrison, retired. Or I was retired until this morning." Sarah introduced herself and Maria, explaining how they'd arrived at the tunnels. Harrison listened carefully, occasionally asking specific questions about alien patrol patterns or the behavior of the converted humans. "We're seeing the same thing everywhere," Harrison said when they finished. Initial collection sweeps followed by systematic processing of the population. The converts are being used to identify and locate people who might pose a threat to their operation. "What kind of threat could we possibly pose to them?" Sarah asked. "They shut down our entire civilization in about 5 minutes. Harrison's expression grew thoughtful. "That's what's interesting. If we were truly powerless, why bother converting people at all? Why not just eliminate resistance entirely? They're trying to control us, which suggests they need something from us." A young woman working on a radio setup across the chamber suddenly stood up, excitement visible on her face. "Colonel, I'm getting something from Seattle." The group gathered around the radio as static gave way to a crackling human voice. "This is Resistance Cell 7. Broadcasting from the Seattle Underground. We've made contact with groups in Vancouver, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. The pattern is consistent worldwide. Technological shutdown, systematic collection, and population conversion." Harrison took the microphone. "This is Resistance Cell 1 in Portland. What's the status of military response?" "Negative effective response. Most military assets were neutralized in the initial electromagnetic event. However, we've had some success with pre-digital equipment and improvised weapons. The aliens aren't invulnerable. They can be injured and killed, but it requires getting close enough to engage them directly." Sarah felt a spark of hope at this news. The aliens could be hurt. They weren't gods, just an advanced species that could be fought. The radio operator continued. "We've also discovered something important about the conversion process. It appears to be reversible in the early stages, but requires specific electromagnetic frequencies to disrupt. We're working on building devices that can free the converted." Harrison leaned closer to the microphone. "Any word from government leadership?" "Most official government has been captured or eliminated. Resistance is being organized at the grassroots level. Military survivors are attempting to establish command structures, but communication remains limited." As the radio conversation continued, Sarah found herself looking around the chamber with new eyes. These people, accountants, nurses, students, retirees, had become humanity's resistance in a matter of hours. They weren't soldiers or heroes from movies. They were ordinary people who had refused to submit to an impossible situation. Maria was checking her medical supplies, preparing to treat wounded resistance fighters. The elderly gentleman near the radio was carefully transcribing frequency information that might help free the converted. A teenager was working on what looked like a homemade explosive device, her young face set with determination that belonged on someone decades older. "Sarah," Harrison said, approaching her with a clipboard that looked absurdly normal given their circumstances. "We need to organize work assignments. What skills do you bring to this?" Sarah almost laughed. "What skills did an accountant bring to fighting an alien invasion? I'm good with numbers, organization, keeping track of things." "Perfect. We need someone to coordinate supply distribution and track our resources. It's not glamorous, but it's essential." As Sarah took the clipboard, she realized that her ordinary life hadn't ended with the alien invasion. It had simply been redefined. The same attention to detail that made her good at reconciling quarterly reports would now be used to help humanity survive. The organizational skills that had seemed so mundane that morning were exactly what the resistance needed. Outside, the alien ships continued their systematic conquest of the surface world. But down in the forgotten tunnels beneath Portland, humanity was learning to fight back, one spreadsheet at a time if necessary. 3 weeks underground had transformed Sarah from a mild-mannered accountant into something she didn't quite recognize. Her hands, once soft from office work, now bore calluses from carrying supply crates and assembling makeshift weapons. Her business clothes had been replaced by practical clothing salvaged from abandoned stores. Dark pants, sturdy boots, and a jacket with enough pockets to carry the various tools of resistance work. The Shanghai tunnels had evolved into a complex network of interconnected chambers, serving different functions. Sarah's domain was the supply depot, a former storage room where she meticulously tracked every can of food, every battery, and every scrap of material that might be useful to their growing resistance movement. Her accounting skills had proven invaluable in managing resources for nearly 200 survivors who now called the tunnels home. The resistance had grown beyond anything Colonel Harrison had initially imagined. Survivors continued to trickle in daily, guided by a network of safe houses and coded radio transmissions. Each new arrival brought information about conditions on the surface, and the picture they painted was increasingly grim. The aliens, who the resistance had taken to calling the Shepherds after intercepting their own communications, had established processing centers throughout the city. Humans were being systematically categorized and either converted into compliant workers or shipped off to unknown destinations. The converted ones wandered the streets in groups, helping the Shepherds identify hiding places and potential resistance members. But the Shepherds weren't the only threat. Reports were coming in about something worse, entities that the radio networks referred to as hunters. These were different from the Shepherds who had conducted the initial invasion. Where the Shepherds seemed to value order and control, the hunters appeared to take pleasure in the pursuit itself. Sarah was updating her inventory logs when Maria burst into the supply depot, her nurse's training evident in how quickly she moved while still maintaining careful control. "Sarah, we need medical supplies immediately. Marcus's team encountered hunters topside." Sarah didn't ask questions. She grabbed a pre-packed medical kit and followed Maria through the tunnel system to the makeshift infirmary. The smell hit her first, blood and burnt flesh that made her stomach lurch. Then she saw the casualties. Marcus, a former construction foreman who led one of their scavenging teams, was conscious but pale. His left arm hung at an unnatural angle, and angry red burns covered the exposed skin on his neck and face. 2 other team members lay on improvised stretchers, their injuries more severe. "What happened?" Colonel Harrison demanded as Maria began working on Marcus's injuries. Marcus grimaced as Maria set his arm. "We were hitting that electronics store on Burnside, trying to get components for the frequency disruptors. Everything was going smooth until they showed up. Shepherds. No, sir. These were different, faster. They didn't try to capture us, they were hunting us for sport." Marcus's voice carried a tremor that Sarah had never heard from the normally unflappable man. "They had weapons that fired some kind of energy beam. Burned right through concrete like it was paper. How many?" 3 of them. They cornered us in the store, but we managed to escape through the back when Johnson here threw a homemade flashbang. Bought us enough time to reach the tunnel entrance." Harrison's face was grim. "Did they follow you?" "Don't think so. But Colonel, they knew we were there. They were waiting for us. Someone told them we were coming." The implications of Marcus's words settled over the group like a cold weight. Sarah felt her chest tighten as she realized what he was suggesting. The resistance had been betrayed from within. Harrison called an emergency meeting in the main chamber. As word spread through the tunnels, Sarah watched the faces of people she'd come to know over the past 3 weeks. There was Jennifer, the teacher who'd organized a school for the refugee children. Tom, the electrician who kept their improvised power systems running. Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who somehow managed to cook decent meals from canned goods and salvaged ingredients. Any one of them could be a traitor. The thought made Sarah feel sick. "We have a security breach," Harrison announced without preamble. Today's mission was compromised. The hunters were waiting for our team. Murmurs of concern rippled through the gathered survivors. Sarah noticed how people began to look at each other with new suspicion, trust eroding in real time. I want everyone to understand that this doesn't necessarily mean we have a conscious traitor among us, Harrison continued. The aliens have demonstrated sophisticated technology. It's possible they've found ways to monitor us that we don't understand yet. But Sarah could see in his eyes that he didn't believe his own words. Neither did anyone else. Dr. Kim, a psychiatrist who'd joined them the previous week, stood up. Colonel, I've been studying the conversion process based on observations of captured individuals. It's not just about compliance. The aliens are implanting some kind of monitoring capability. Converted humans can be used as unwitting surveillance assets. Are you suggesting someone here has been partially converted without knowing it? The question came from Jennifer, her teacher's voice carrying barely controlled fear. It's possible. The early stages of conversion might not be immediately obvious. Subtle behavioral changes, gaps in memory, unexplained knowledge of things they shouldn't know. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She'd been so focused on tracking supplies and resources that she hadn't paid close attention to behavioral changes in the group. But now that she thought about it, there had been small things. People knowing about supply runs they shouldn't have known about. Conversations ending abruptly when certain individuals approached. What do we do? Maria asked. How do we identify a partial convert? Dr. Kim shook her head. I don't know yet. But I think we need to implement security protocols immediately. Compartmentalize information. Limit knowledge of operations to only those who absolutely need to know. Harrison nodded grimly. As of right now, we're implementing cell structure. No individual will have knowledge of operations outside their immediate responsibility. All mission details will be distributed on a need-to-know basis only. The meeting broke up with an atmosphere of paranoia that made Sarah's skin crawl. People who had become like family over the past 3 weeks now eyed each other with suspicion. The unity that had carried them through the early days of the resistance was fracturing. Sarah returned to her supply depot but found it impossible to concentrate on her inventory. Every footstep in the tunnel outside made her look up nervously. When Tom the electrician stopped by to check on the power feed to her lighting system, she found herself watching his movements carefully, looking for signs that he might not be entirely human anymore. Late that night, unable to sleep, Sarah made her way to the main chamber where a few people were maintaining the radio watch. The overnight operator was a young man named David, who'd been a computer programmer before the invasion. He was hunched over the equipment, adjusting frequencies and listening for transmissions from other resistance cells. Anything interesting? Sarah asked, settling down beside him. David shook his head. Lot of static tonight. Something's interfering with the usual frequencies. He paused, then looked at her with troubled eyes. Sarah, can I ask you something? Sure. Do you ever feel like you're being watched? Not by people, but by something else? Sarah's blood went cold. What do you mean? I've been having these dreams. Or maybe they're not dreams. I wake up and I know things I shouldn't know. Like where certain resistance cells are located or what their operational schedules are, but I don't remember learning that information. David's words confirmed Sarah's worst fears. The partial conversion was real, and it was happening to people in their own group. But if David was aware of it, was he still controllable? Or was this awareness itself part of the alien plan? David, Sarah said carefully, how long have you been having these experiences? About a week. Maybe longer. It's hard to tell, my memory has been fuzzy lately. He looked at her with desperate eyes. Sarah, I think they got to me somehow. I think I'm becoming one of them. Before Sarah could respond, David's expression suddenly went blank. His eyes lost their frightened human quality and became flat and emotionless. When he spoke again, his voice carried that same monotone quality she'd heard from the converted people on the surface. You should report to the collection centers, David said calmly. Resistance is futile. Cooperation will ensure your survival. Sarah backed away slowly, her heart pounding. David was still sitting at the radio, but he was no longer David. Whatever the aliens had done to him was complete now, and she was alone with a converted human in a chamber full of sensitive resistance equipment. She had two choices: sound an alarm that would wake the entire camp and reveal their security breach, or try to handle this quietly to prevent panic. Either way, everything had changed. The war wasn't just being fought on the surface anymore. The aliens had brought the battle into the heart of their sanctuary. David's converted eyes tracked her movement as she edged toward the tunnel exit. Behind those familiar features was something alien and hostile, wearing her friend's face like a mask. The resistance was no longer fighting just for humanity's freedom. They were fighting for their very souls. Sarah's hand closed around the emergency signal device clipped to her belt, a simple mechanical clacker that would alert the camp without using electronics. But as she prepared to sound the alarm, David's converted form suddenly slumped forward, his head hitting the radio console with a dull thud. "Sarah?" David's voice was weak but unmistakably his own again. "What happened? I feel like I just woke up from the worst nightmare." Sarah hesitated, the clacker halfway to her mouth. David's eyes had regained their human quality, filled with confusion and fear rather than the flat emptiness she'd seen moments before. Was this another trick of the conversion process, or had David somehow fought off the alien control? "David, what's the last thing you remember?" she asked carefully, keeping her distance. "I was adjusting the radio frequencies, trying to cut through some interference. Then, nothing. Like someone turned off a light switch in my brain." He looked at the radio console, then at Sarah's defensive posture. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Before Sarah could answer, Dr. Kim appeared in the tunnel entrance, drawn by some instinct that told her she was needed. The psychiatrist took in the scene quickly, Sarah's tense posture, David's confusion, the abandoned radio equipment. "Is everything all right here?" Dr. Kim asked, though her tone suggested she already knew it wasn't. Sarah quickly explained what had happened. David's admission about the dreams, his sudden conversion, and then his apparent return to normal. Dr. Kim listened intently, occasionally asking David to describe his experiences in more detail. "This is actually encouraging," Dr. Kim said finally. "If David was able to regain control, it suggests the conversion process isn't necessarily permanent, at least in its early stages." "But what if it happens again?" David asked. "What if I convert while I'm around other people? I could compromise operations, get people killed." Dr. Kim was quiet for a moment, thinking. "We need to understand what triggered your recovery. Sarah, what were you doing when David regained consciousness?" "Nothing special. I was just standing there trying to decide whether to sound an alarm." "Were you afraid?" "Terrified," Dr. Kim nodded thoughtfully. "Fear produces specific electromagnetic patterns in the human brain. It's possible that your emotional state created some kind of interference with the alien control mechanism. The implications of this discovery spread through the resistance camp like wildfire over the next few days. Dr. Kim, working with Tom, the electrician, and several other technically minded survivors, began developing what they called humanity triggers and devices designed to generate the specific electromagnetic frequencies associated with strong human emotions. Sarah found herself at the center of these experiments, since her fear response had apparently broken David's conversion. It was unsettling to have her terror treated as a scientific phenomenon, but if it could help save people from alien control, she was willing to endure the discomfort. The first successful test came 3 days later when they encountered another converted survivor. Rebecca, the former receptionist from Sarah's office building, had somehow found her way to the tunnel entrance. She stood in the main chamber with that familiar blank expression, repeating the standard conversion mantra about cooperation and submission. "Rebecca," Sarah said, stepping forward despite her fear. "Remember Morrison and Associates? Remember complaining about the coffee machine? You always said it sounded like it was dying." Tom activated the electromagnetic device they'd built, sending out pulses designed to mimic the frequency patterns Dr. Kim had measured from Sarah's brain during moments of intense emotion. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then Rebecca blinked, her expression shifting from blank compliance to confused recognition. "Sarah, where am I? How did I get here?" The breakthrough was significant, but it also revealed the true scope of the problem they faced. The aliens weren't just conquering humanity, they were stealing human consciousness itself, turning people into biological robots while trapping their real selves somewhere deep inside their own minds. Colonel Harrison called an emergency leadership meeting to discuss the implications of their discovery. The core group now consisted of Sarah, Dr. Kim, Maria, Tom, and Marcus, the people who had proven most resistant to infiltration and most essential to the Resistance's survival. "We've confirmed that conversion can be reversed, at least in recent cases," Harrison began, But we've also confirmed that the aliens are using converted humans as surveillance assets. Every converted person we encounter potentially knows the location of this base. How many people know about the tunnel system? Sarah asked, consulting her ever-present notebook where she tracked not just supplies but personnel and security information. Too many, Marcus replied grimly. Before we implemented the cell structure, information was shared pretty freely. I'd estimate at least 50 people had detailed knowledge of our layout and operations. And we don't know how many of those 50 have been compromised, Maria added. Harrison leaned back in his chair, looking older than his years. I think we need to consider abandoning this location. The suggestion hung in the air like a physical weight. The Shanghai tunnels had become home to nearly 300 survivors. They'd built workshops, an infirmary, sleeping quarters, and a complex communication center. Starting over somewhere else would mean leaving behind weeks of infrastructure development and potentially exposing themselves to discovery during the relocation. Where would we go? Tom asked. The aliens have been systematically mapping the underground networks. Every tunnel system in the city is probably compromised by now. Dr. Kim spoke up. What if we didn't hide? What if we fought back directly? With what? Marcus laughed bitterly. We've got maybe 30 people with military experience and weapons that are basically toys compared to alien technology. But we have something they don't expect, Sarah said, an idea forming in her mind. We have the ability to free their converted humans. What if we could turn that into a weapon? The others looked at her with varying expressions of confusion and interest. Sarah stood up and began pacing, her analytical mind working through the possibilities. Think about it. The aliens are using converted humans as their primary workforce and surveillance network. They're treating them like biological computers. Reliable, controllable, predictable. But what if we could make them unreliable? You're talking about sabotage from within, Harrison said slowly. Exactly. We know conversion can be reversed with the right electromagnetic triggers. What if we could build devices that would randomly trigger reversals throughout the city? Imagine thousands of converted humans suddenly remembering who they are, all at the same time. Tom was nodding enthusiastically. It would be chaos. The aliens would lose their primary control mechanism just when they needed it most. And in that chaos, Maria added, we could launch coordinated strikes against their processing centers, free the people who haven't been converted yet. Dr. Kim was already pulling out notes and sketches. We'd need to build dozens of broadcast devices, coordinate with other resistance cells, time everything perfectly. And we'd only get one chance. Once the aliens realize what we're doing, they'll adapt their conversion techniques. Can we do it? Harrison asked. Sarah looked around the table at these people who had become her family, her friends, her fellow warriors in a battle she'd never imagined fighting. 6 months ago, her biggest challenge had been balancing quarterly reports. Now she was planning to wage electromagnetic warfare against an alien invasion force. We're going to need a lot more batteries, she said. The planning session that followed lasted 18 hours. They mapped out target locations, calculated power requirements, identified communication protocols, and planned contingencies for when things inevitably went wrong. Sarah's organizational skills proved crucial in coordinating the complex logistics of what they began calling Liberation Day. As dawn approached somewhere above their underground hideout, Sarah realized that she was no longer the same person who had fallen into a dumpster to escape alien collectors. That woman had been running away from the impossible situation that had destroyed her ordinary life. This woman was running toward it, ready to fight for something bigger than quarterly reports and coffee machines. She was fighting for the right of humanity to remain human, even if it killed her. The war was about to change, and somehow an accountant from Portland was going to help change it. Liberation Day arrived with the kind of gray Portland morning that Sarah had once found depressing. Now, as she crouched in an abandoned parking garage 6 blocks from the main alien processing center, the overcast sky felt like protective cover for what they were about to attempt. 2 months of preparation had transformed the ragtag group of tunnel dwellers into something resembling a real military force. Sarah wore tactical gear that Tom had modified to carry her specialized equipment, frequency generators, backup power cells, and the comprehensive coordination charts that would be essential for timing the simultaneous attacks across the city. The resistance had grown beyond anything they'd initially imagined. Similar groups in Seattle, San Francisco, and Los Angeles had built their own liberation devices using plans shared through encrypted radio transmissions. Today's operation would happen simultaneously across the entire West Coast, with the goal of freeing hundreds of thousands of converted humans all at once. Sarah's role was crucial but terrifying. She would coordinate the timing for 12 separate strike teams while staying mobile enough to avoid the alien response that would inevitably come. Her accounting background had evolved into something much more complex. She was now a battlefield logistics coordinator for humanity's last desperate gamble. Colonel. Harrison's voice crackled through the improvised radio system they'd built using pre-digital components. All teams report ready status. One by one, the confirmations came in. Marcus was positioned near the primary processing center with a team of 20 fighters. Maria led a medical team that would treat freed humans and evacuate casualties. Tom's technical squad was scattered across the city with the large-scale frequency broadcasters that would do the actual work of breaking the alien control signals. Liberation Command. "This is Frequency Team Alpha," Tom's voice reported. "Devices online and ready for broadcast." Similar reports came from the other technical teams. Sarah checked her coordination charts, confirming that all teams were in position and ready to execute the plan they'd rehearsed countless times in the tunnels. "All teams, this is Liberation Command," Sarah announced, her voice steadier than she felt. "Initiate liberation protocol in 10 seconds, Mark." She counted down, watching the second hand on the old analog watch that had become her most important piece of equipment. At 0, she keyed her radio and spoke the words that would either free humanity or get them all killed. "Execute liberation protocol. Execute, execute, execute." Across Portland, 12 high-powered electromagnetic broadcasters began transmitting the specific frequencies that Dr. Kim had identified as human consciousness triggers. The devices, built from salvaged electronics and powered by car batteries, sent out waves designed to disrupt the alien control mechanism that kept converted humans compliant. The effect was immediate and startling. Through her binoculars, Sarah could see the processing center where hundreds of converted humans had been working in orderly lines, loading supplies and maintaining equipment with mechanical precision. Suddenly, the orderly lines dissolved into chaos as people stopped, looked around in confusion, and began to remember who they were. "It's working," Marcus's voice exploded over the radio. "They're breaking free." Hundreds of them. But the aliens' response was swift and brutal. The shepherds who had been overseeing the processing center moved with deadly efficiency, producing weapons that fired beams of coherent energy. The freed humans, disoriented and confused, were easy targets. "Medical teams, move in now," Sarah ordered. "Security teams, provide cover for the evacuation." The carefully planned operation immediately devolved into a running battle through the streets of Portland. Sarah found herself directing movements and coordinating resources in real time, as the situation changed faster than anyone had anticipated. Her radio crackled with reports from across the city as similar battles erupted at every processing center. "Liberation Command, this is Frequency Team Charlie," came a panicked voice. "We're under attack by hunters. They found our broadcasting position." Sarah checked her charts and realized that Frequency Team Charlie was responsible for maintaining the electromagnetic field over the Eastern District. If they went down, thousands of recently freed humans would be recaptured or killed. "Marcus, can you spare a squad to assist Charlie?" "Negative. We're pinned down here. These bastards brought in reinforcements." Sarah made a decision that would have been impossible for the cautious accountant she'd once been. "I'm moving to assist Charlie myself." "Sarah, no." Harrison's voice cut through the radio chatter. "You're too valuable to risk in direct combat." But Sarah was already moving, her coordinator's instincts telling her that the mission would fail without someone taking personal risks to hold it together. She grabbed her portable frequency generator and set off through the chaotic streets toward Team Charlie's position. The city had become a war zone. Freed humans were running in every direction, some trying to help others, some simply fleeing in terror. Alien aircraft swept overhead, hunting for resistance fighters with lethal precision. The orderly invasion that had begun months ago had turned into something much messier and more desperate. Sarah found Team Charlie's position under siege by 3 of the deadly hunters. These aliens were different from the shepherds, sleeker, faster, and equipped with personal energy weapons that could cut through concrete. The technical team was trapped in the upper floor of an office building. their broadcasting equipment still operational but vulnerable. Working from the building across the street, Sarah set up her portable frequency generator and began coordinating a rescue operation using the remaining mobile teams in the area. Her accounting skills translated perfectly to battlefield logistics, tracking resources, calculating timing, optimizing the allocation of limited assets under extreme pressure. Team Charlie, this is Sarah. Hold your position for 90 more seconds. Help is coming. The rescue succeeded, but barely. 2 resistance fighters were killed and several others wounded, getting the technical team and their equipment to safety. But the frequency broadcast continued, keeping the Eastern District's freed humans beyond alien control. As the day wore on, Sarah found herself adapting to the rhythm of urban warfare. Her role evolved from coordinator to something more like a battlefield commander, making split-second decisions that affected hundreds of lives. The quiet woman who had once balanced books was now balancing human lives against tactical objectives. The liberation operation succeeded beyond their most optimistic projections. By evening, an estimated 40,000 humans had been freed from alien control across Portland alone. Similar successes were reported from the other West Coast cities participating in the coordinated attack. But success came with a terrible cost. The resistance had lost nearly 30% of their fighting force, including several key leaders. The aliens had demonstrated that they could adapt to human tactics much faster than anyone had hoped. And most troubling of all, the freed humans weren't necessarily better off than they had been under alien control. Sarah found herself in a temporary command post set up in the ruins of a shopping mall, trying to coordinate care for thousands of confused, traumatized people who had suddenly remembered months of being controlled by an alien intelligence. Many were catatonic. Others were violently hostile to anyone who tried to help them. All of them needed food, medical care, and psychological support that the resistance simply couldn't provide. "We freed them," Maria said, her voice heavy with exhaustion as she treated the latest group of liberation victims. "But we don't know how to help them." Dr. Kim was working with the most severely affected cases, people whose minds seemed to have been damaged by the experience of controlled consciousness. The psychological trauma is worse than I anticipated. Some of them may never fully recover. Colonel Harrison joined them as night fell over the destroyed city. "We've received word from the other cities. San Francisco freed an estimated 60,000 people. Los Angeles managed almost 80,000. Seattle had partial success before the aliens adapted their control frequencies. So what now?" Sarah asked. "We've shown that we can fight back, but we've also shown them that we're a real threat. They're going to hit us harder now." Harrison nodded grimly. "Intelligence suggests they're bringing in additional forces. Ships are arriving from off-world. Whatever we do next, we need to do it fast." Sarah looked out over the chaos they had created. Thousands of freed humans wandering through the ruins of their city. Resistance fighters trying to provide aid with inadequate resources. And overhead, the alien ships that still controlled the sky. Liberation Day had been a victory, but it felt more like the beginning of a much larger war. Her ordinary life was now just a memory, replaced by the extraordinary responsibility of helping to lead humanity's fight for survival. The woman who had once worried about coffee machines was now planning humanity's next move against an interstellar empire, and somehow, that felt exactly right. 6 months after Liberation Day, Sarah stood on the observation deck of humanity's first orbital defense platform, watching the Earth turn slowly below. The platform had been built using salvaged alien technology and human ingenuity, representing everything the resistance had learned about fighting an enemy that had initially seemed invincible. The war had changed dramatically since that desperate day in Portland. The liberation of hundreds of thousands of humans had provided the resistance with both the numbers and the knowledge needed to begin fighting back effectively. More importantly, it had demonstrated to humanity that the aliens weren't gods, they were simply another species that could be defeated with the right strategy and sufficient determination. Sarah's role had evolved far beyond anything she could have imagined when she jumped from her apartment window 6 months ago. The organizational skills that had made her a competent accountant had proven invaluable in coordinating a global resistance movement. She now served as Director of Strategic Coordination for the United Human Resistance, managing logistics for operations spanning multiple continents. The command center behind her buzzed with activity as hundreds of technicians and strategists worked to coordinate the final phase of what they'd come to call the Reclamation War. Multiple screens displayed tactical information from around the globe, where human forces were preparing for simultaneous strikes against the aliens' primary strongholds. "Sarah," Colonel Harrison called from the Central Command Station. He wore the insignia of a general now, his promotion reflecting humanity's need for experienced military leadership. "We're receiving final confirmations from the Continental commanders." Sarah moved to the main display where a three-dimensional map of Earth showed the positions of human and alien forces. The past 6 months had seen humanity evolve from scattered resistance cells into a coordinated military force, capable of challenging alien control over entire regions. The key breakthrough had come from studying captured alien technology and freed human scientists who had been forced to work on alien projects. Dr. Kim's research into the conversion process had revealed that the aliens' greatest strength, their ability to control human consciousness, was also their greatest weakness. They had become dependent on converted humans for labor and local knowledge, making them vulnerable when those humans were freed. "Report from Australia," came a voice from the communication station. "Operation Southern Cross is ready to proceed. They've identified the primary control nexus in Sydney and have teams in position." Similar reports arrived from Europe, Asia, and the Americas. The plan was ambitious beyond anything previously attempted. Simultaneous strikes against the alien command centers on every continent, time to prevent the aliens from coordinating their response or implementing emergency protocols. Sarah consulted her master coordination chart, a document that had grown to encompass the movements of over 2 million resistance fighters worldwide. Her accounting background had scaled up to something unprecedented in human history: the logistical coordination of a species at war. "All Continental commands report ready," she announced. "We are go for Operation Reclamation." The countdown proceeded with mechanical precision. Sarah watched the chronometer tick toward 0 while monitoring reports from around the globe. This was humanity's single best chance to end the war decisively. If they failed, the aliens would likely call in additional forces from their empire and crush human resistance permanently. "Execute Operation Reclamation," General Harrison ordered. Across Earth, human forces moved simultaneously against alien strongholds. The attacks were coordinated with precision that would have been impossible without the communication networks the resistance had built using captured alien technology. Sarah tracked the progress of each strike force, adjusting resources and timing as the battle unfolded in real time. The aliens' response was immediate and devastating. Energy weapons lanced down from orbital platforms, targeting human command centers with lethal accuracy. But humanity had learned from 6 months of warfare. The command structures were distributed and redundant, designed to survive the loss of individual leaders and facilities. Receiving reports from all theaters, the communications officer announced. "Human forces have breached alien defenses at 17 primary targets. Resistance is heavy but manageable." Sarah felt a moment of cautious optimism as the reports continued to arrive. The human attacks were succeeding beyond their most optimistic projections. 6 months of careful planning and preparation were paying off, as resistance forces moved through alien facilities, freeing converted humans and destroying control equipment. But then the real surprise came. "General," the sensor operator called out, his voice tight with tension. "We're detecting massive energy signatures from the alien command ship. They're powering up some kind of weapon system we haven't seen before." On the main display, the enormous alien vessel that had served as their command center began to glow with an ominous blue light. Sarah had seen that light before. It was the same energy signature the aliens used for their conversion technology, but magnified thousands of times. "They're going to try to convert the entire planet at once," Dr. Kim said, her voice filled with horror. "If they can generate enough power, they could override human consciousness on a global scale." Sarah stared at the display, her mind racing through the implications. All of their victories would be meaningless if every human on Earth was simultaneously converted into an alien puppet. The resistance would cease to exist in a matter of minutes. "How long do we have?" General Harrison demanded. "Based on the energy buildup, maybe 20 minutes before they can fire," the sensor operator replied. Sarah looked at the tactical display, calculating distances and available resources. The alien command ship was in high orbit, protected by energy shields and defensive weapons that had proven impervious to conventional human weapons. But there was one option they hadn't tried. "General, we need to ram it." Harrison looked at her as if she'd lost her mind. "Sarah, this platform doesn't have the propulsion to reach orbital velocity. And even if it did, we'd never penetrate their shields." "Not with the platform," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger as the plan formed in her mind. "With the frequency generators." She moved to the engineering station, pulling up the specifications for the electromagnetic devices that had made Liberation Day possible. "We've been using these to disrupt alien control signals. But what if we reverse the polarity and overload their conversion systems instead of disrupting them?" The chief engineer, a former MIT professor named Dr. Williams, caught on immediately. "You're talking about creating a feedback loop. Send their own conversion energy back at them." "Exactly. We modify our frequency generators to reflect and amplify their signal instead of blocking it. When they try to convert the planet, their own energy will overload their systems." "It's theoretically possible," Dr. Williams said, already running calculations. "But we'd need to modify every frequency generator on the planet simultaneously. And we'd only get one chance. If it doesn't work, we're all converted." General Harrison was quiet for a moment, weighing the risks. "How long would the modifications take?" 15 minutes if we work fast and use every technician on the platform." "Do it." The next 15 minutes were the most intense of Sarah's life. She coordinated modifications to frequency generators across the globe, while simultaneously managing the ongoing military operations and preparing for the aliens' conversion attempt. Her organizational skills were pushed to their absolute limit as she tracked hundreds of simultaneous tasks while watching the alien. "Weapon charge toward firing readiness. All stations report. Modifications complete," Dr. Williams announced with 2 minutes to spare. "Global frequency network is ready for reverse polarity operation," Sarah reported. "All we need now is for them to fire." The alien weapon reached full charge with a visible flash that could be seen from the platform's observation deck. Sarah felt a moment of absolute terror as she realized that humanity's survival now depended on an untested theory about alien technology. "Alien conversion beam detected," the sensor operator announced. "Global transmission beginning. Activate reverse polarity frequency network," Sarah ordered. "All stations execute now around the world." Thousands of modified frequency generators activated simultaneously, creating a coordinated electromagnetic field designed to reflect the alien conversion signal back at its source. For several seconds, nothing seemed to happen. Then the alien command ship began to convulse. The massive vessel, which had hung in space with perfect stability for months, started to writhe like a living thing in pain. The blue energy that had been meant to convert humanity was instead overloading the aliens' own systems, creating cascading failures throughout their technology. One by one, alien installations around the globe went dark as the feedback loop spread through their entire network. The converted humans under their control suddenly collapsed as their control systems failed, then slowly began to stand up with human expressions of confusion and recognition. The alien command ship lasted another 30 seconds before its power core went critical. The explosion was visible from Earth's surface, a brief new star that marked the end of the invasion. Sarah stood at the observation deck, watching the debris field that had once been humanity's greatest threat. Around her, the command center erupted in cheers as reports came in from around the globe. The aliens were retreating, their remaining forces fleeing Earth in whatever ships were still functional. "It's over," General Harrison said, joining her at the observation deck. "They're running." Sarah nodded, but her expression was thoughtful rather than celebratory. This was just one fleet from one world in their empire. They'll be back eventually, probably with better technology and different tactics. "Are you suggesting we shouldn't celebrate?" Sarah smiled, thinking of the ordinary life she'd lost and the extraordinary one she'd gained. "Oh, we should definitely celebrate. But we should also keep building defense platforms and frequency generators and anything else we can think of." She looked down at Earth, where billions of freed humans were beginning to rebuild their civilization with the knowledge that they were not alone in the universe and that they were capable of fighting for their survival against impossible odds. Sarah Chen had lived an ordinary life until war came knocking. Now she lived an extraordinary one, helping to prepare humanity for whatever else the universe might throw at them. And somehow, Despite everything she'd lost, that felt like exactly the life she was meant to live. The accountant who had worried about coffee machines was gone. In her place stood someone who worried about the survival of the human species. It was a much bigger responsibility, but after everything she'd been through, Sarah found she was more than capable of handling it. After all, it was just a matter of organization.